but you know you better tread carefully. Fool me twice, I'm your enemy. I'm your enemy. Run, you better run. Vendetta, run, you better. Vendetta.
When it comes to reading fantasy fiction, especially YA, I'm learning that the main character that's supposed to be portrayed as being strong usually isn't very strong. The topic for today? Victimhood, because that's been a hot topic lately. Originally, I was going to do a book review of the Zodiac Academy. It's one of those books where you see everywhere on BookTube, on Book Talk especially. Nobody wants to shut up about it. So I picked it up out of sheer curiosity. The back made it sound interesting. I mean, it had a lot of tropes and a lot of cliches that obviously were kind of overused by this point. But I still wanted to figure out what this book was about, what had everybody talking about it. And after reading it, I still don't know. I have the audiobook, but I wanted to read the physical copy to kind of get more of a gist and just to double check and see what exactly I missed. It doesn't feel like there's a lot to this book, and it's pretty plain, pretty simple, but there was a lot of disturbing content that also had people talking, and I kind of wanted to talk about some of that today. Obviously, this book is not the only inspiration for this video. I've been meaning to talk about this topic probably since I started my channel, is because it is one of my biggest pet peeves, is when the writer presents a character that's supposed to be super strong and like the ultra female warrior, but she's either a Mary Sue or she's a victim, and they don't really showcase their strengths or allow the character to have any strengths or personality traits aside from said Mary Sue qualities or being the victim. It's like their only personality trait. Books like A Court of Thorns and Roses and books like The Cruel Prince also seem to practice this principle a lot, but again, there's not a lot of showcasing the strengths and showcasing the skills and qualities that make up this character. Don't get me wrong, you can have your character be a victim and still be a strong character. You can still have a character that has Mary Sue qualities, but they're still a strong character. They're still independent. It's kind of the separation from the label and the character where it gets a little hazy. I don't think a lot of writers are aware of how to present their characters as having different traits and different skill set, and I don't think that writers are purposely presenting their characters as being Mary Sues. Sometimes they do want them to be victims because they want their characters to be more sympathetic, they want to tell an underdog story, or they just feel bad because their character has kind of been put through the ringer and they know that their character has come through hard times, so they want to show this adversity and they kind of want to show the journey through overcoming said adversity. But the way that it's presented has become such a cliche, and it's become something that's so overdone and so underdeveloped that it actually hurts the story instead of kind of promoting the kind of story that you might have in mind. Now, first I want to talk about the Mary Sues, which both characters in the Zodiac Academy are. They come to find out later on, way later in life than they really should, that they are heirs to some of the most powerful rulers in the Fae Kingdom that they just recently learned existed. They happen to inhabit all four elements, which is very, very rare, next to impossible, and these two, seemingly unaware that they had any abilities to begin with or were capable of said abilities or gifts, seem to inhabit all four elements, and it kind of puts a target on their back. I do believe Farrah in A Court of Thorns and Roses is pretty much a Mary Sue. She's kind of presented as being strong and funny, and we're told constantly that she's witty and funny and clever and all this stuff. I didn't see it really. The only character-defining traits that might prove this would be at the very beginning of the book when she chooses to risk shooting a wolf that she doesn't know if it's a wolf or a fairy, and it just so happens by chance she shoots it with an ash arrow that happens to be one of the deadlier things that will kill the Fae. If you were to shoot it with a regular arrow, it really wouldn't have an effect, but by coincidence, she had an ash arrow, and I guess she didn't even realize that it could be deadly for a fairy, so she just used it because it was her last arrow. And there were other aspects in the book that I remember, like towards the end, she's supposed to fight that dragon worm that everybody's talking about on Book Talk, and it kind of cracks me up because if I recall, the way that she killed it had a little bit of tactical maneuvering, but realistically, I don't think it would have don't think it would have happened. She sticks like a stick in the mud, and as it's rushing toward her, it sticks up, and it's supposed to like gut it basically because it's coming at her with full force. If it was a sword, if I'm remembering wrong, and if it's a sword, maybe it would have worked. It's been a year and a half since I read the book. I am going to be making a compilation video on the Court of Thorns and Roses series as kind of an overall and what I think about it, because it's a lot to talk about and I just don't have the time this year. If it really was a stick, it was kind of like sticking up in the mud, so it doesn't really have a strong enough foundation. If that thing was coming at you with full force, it would have knocked you back, it would have knocked the stick over, it would not have stuck in the mud of all things. If it was even dry enough and thick enough to stand on its own and not break, because it was near the mud, in the mud, which means it would be damp, it would be wet, and it would break. I mean, I could be remembering wrong. It could have been a sword, it could have been an ash limb. I don't know. I just remember thinking it was really stupid, and it was supposed to be one of the more defining moments to showcase her strengths, so I think that it was worth mentioning, because aside from that, I don't see how Farrah is a very strong character. She does come off more as a Mary Sue. Definitely is the victim, especially in the beginning. I do remember the one thing that kind of annoyed me was how she keeps feeling sorry for herself. She's constantly having a pity party. She's the only one in the family who takes anything seriously and realizes it's a serious situation. She takes it upon herself to have this guardian role because of a promise she made to her dying mother to take care of the family, but she's constantly feeling sorry for herself because she feels like she's the only one who recognizes the situation. She's the only one who's hunting and gathering for food. She doesn't really give her sisters much credit, and she kind of looks at everyone in her family with this sort of disdain. So she's a very arrogant, unlikable character for me. I'll never understand why people think that she's such a badass, but that's just my opinion. The only self-sacrificing decision I remember her making was her deciding to take responsibility for killing the wolf and going to live with the fairy, going to accept her fate, blah blah blah, to protect her family. But then at every turn throughout the rest of the book, she's trying to figure out ways to outsmart the Fae so she can get back to her family. It kind of negates everything because you are choosing to try to figure out a way to outmaneuver them to get back to your family, which I understand, but that would just put your family at risk again. That would put you at risk again. In the Zodiac Academy, while Darcy and Tori are both presented as Mary Sues in the very beginning, they do in fact incorporate a lot of victimhood personality traits that pretty much makes up their sole purpose throughout the book. They're constantly getting picked on, they're constantly getting bullied, they're constantly being psychologically tortured by the Fae that know so much more than they do. Even their friends don't really stand up for them, and they don't really stand up for themselves throughout most of the book. I think the closest thing to standing up was when Tori was trying to seduce one of the guys, but he was already kind of hemming her in, so it really doesn't come off as like a girl boss moment. It comes off as kind of like feeling pressured and cornered and then trying to psychologically take back control so you're not coming out of it completely emotionally damaged. There was a lot of non-canon here, even if it wasn't graphic stuff. Really made me uncomfortable. It was the way that it was presented as being hot, and it was the way of being presented as spicy. It's not something that I feel like these two characters really wanted, and it doesn't really make sense for the story, because the whole point of the story is that these people hate them. The tricks that they were playing on them was just very juvenile. I couldn't take any of it seriously. It just felt like middle grade fiction, honestly, but amped up so that it could be an adult read. And then we have the Cruel Prince, which I was liking at the beginning of the book. She was presented as actually being a strong character with a traumatic background and just trying to cope. They were constantly being picked on, and it was a matter of trying to stand up for each other and trying to stick through it together. That really spoke to me, and that was really kind of like, okay, this is how you present a strong character. But then it was kind of forgotten about because she's kind of forced to make a deal. She can't get what she wants, so she goes for something else that was offered to her and kind of settles. But what was offered to her because of her skill set and because of her particular mindset. So we're supposed to use her talents and we're supposed to use her skills to benefit the people who made her this offer to begin with. She doesn't really do any of that. Again, everything is kind of done for her. She's constantly making errors, she constantly makes mistakes, and when she does finally have an idea of her own, it's way too late to even be able to voice it or make a change. So why is she here? The moment that I feel like could have been the most powerful was when she finally stands up to her stepdad slash kidnapper for what he did, and she finally lets out all of this emotional anger. And I understand it's emotion. I understand she has all of this pent up stuff, and I was pleasantly surprised by the fact that she was able to stand up to him in the end. However, I felt it was premature because she didn't really learn anything through the book. It kind of just came out of nowhere. If she had gone up against him at the beginning of the book, it literally would have had like the same outcome, the same scenario, same circumstance, because nothing's really changed. She hasn't really changed. She hasn't really learned anything, and it's not as powerful of a moment. Great idea, and I feel like the story was a great idea, but I think that it was premature and it was kind of rushed, and she still kind of inhabits these Mary Sue qualities because while there are snippets and slight moments that show her personality and her skill set, it's not enough to actually convince me that she's a strong character, which kind of makes her a Mary Sue. And then once again, she is a victim. She is like an actual victim, especially after the introduction of the story, but she doesn't really go through the changes that a normal underdog would go through. So as a victim, she just kind of stays a victim by the end of it. It just doesn't feel like she learned anything aside from, you know, her bully is also going through stuff. There's a lot of tropes and a lot of cliches in YA today that I feel like aren't necessarily bad, but they're not really explored and they're not really strengthened. They're not really given a chance to grow or given a chance to stand on their own. It's kind of just throwing it in there because, oh, that's spicy, or oh, that's interesting. It's like, yeah, it's interesting. An idea alone can't be the foundation for your story. That is just the start. You need to kind of give it legs so it's actually going somewhere. So there are a few ways so you can combat this if you're currently writing a character that you think might be a Mary Sue or a victim. For one, make sure that they have personality traits that aren't directly linked to either being strong or a victim. They have to have other personality traits and other things to bring to the table if you want to create a convincing character as a person, and you want your readers to see them as more than just the strong character you're trying to portray or the victim that you are trying to draw sympathy from the audience. Being a victim does not always mean that your character is going to be sympathetic. Being a victim does not always mean that your readers are going to give a shit. There are plenty of books with characters that had traumatic events and traumatic things happen to them, horrible, horrible things happen to them, that even presented throughout the story I didn't really care about because it's just, if that's their only personality trait, there's nothing more to really latch onto. What are they learning about these circumstances? What are they getting out of it? What kind of experience can they take away from the journey that they've been going under? How are they fighting this adversity? How are they going to overcome it? And what are they going to get by the end of the book? That's what's going to show growth. That is what's going to make your character stand out from the typical Mary Sues and the victims that you kind of want to avoid with fiction, whether you are writing YA, adult, or anything in between. I feel like one of the best ways to create more likable characters and a more enjoyable experience for readers would be to write smarter, make your characters smarter, give them more tactical ways to get around certain situations, to get out of certain situations. Strengthen your characters will come from how they fought that adversity, not the fact that they did. If you have to constantly tell your reader through other characters, through dialogue or through monologue, how smart and witty and strong your main character is, that's telling versus showing. And while I'm not completely against telling, those are personality traits that you would more so want to show. That's what's more so going to give the personality that your main character wants to have, to make it more fun, to make it more enjoyable, to make them more human and more real. I am currently working on the politics in AuthorTube though. I just finished my research. I just finished writing up my script. So hopefully I can edit it in a week, 2 at the most. So you do have that to look forward to next, and then after that I'll be working on the YA addiction, which I'm kind of hoping to kind of spring out relatively fast since I have a pretty good idea of where I'm headed with it. In the meantime though, I am going to continue to pump out some of these like in-person videos, just kind of opening the discussion on other areas and other avenues that AuthorTube is not really discussing, not really getting into, and avenues that BookTube is also kind of like pushing off to the wayside. So I will see you guys in my next video.